Brilliance Audio presents 223 Orchard Street by Renee Ryan, performed by Karen Peaks. Time had become her greatest enemy, the one obstacle Katie O'Connor hadn't anticipated. She'd meant to arrive at Ellis Island by noon, not a scant hour before the immigration station closed for the night. How could she have known her request to leave the factory floor early would be denied? Or that the storm looming on the horizon would move in so quickly, tossing the ferry boat dangerously off course. The vessel had bucked across the churning waters, listing to port, swinging over to starboard, dipping low, jerking back up, then repeating the process again and again. Katie had clung desperately to the boat's rail, her stomach lurching with every countermaneuver the sea captain attempted. What a wretched crossing. Well, she was here now, and would reunite with her sister soon. That's what mattered, Katie told herself. What didn't matter, what couldn't matter, was the nausea that still plagued her even now that they'd docked and she, along with the other passengers, had been given permission to disembark. At least the rain had halted its merciless attack on New York Harbor, for now. Lifting the heavy, drenched edges of her cloak away from the sodden deck, Katie allowed herself a tight smile of satisfaction. More than happy to put the miserable boat ride behind her, she descended the gangplank. Thunder boomed in the distance, an ominous warning the storm wasn't finished spewing its wrath. The seasickness reared, took hold, but Katie refused to let it linger. Placing the tips of her cold, wet fingers on the back of her neck, she forced air into her lungs. "Breathe," she ordered herself. In and out, in and out, in, out. Katie wanted to blame the queasiness on the journey over from the Bowery, but she knew that wasn't the sole cause. Nerves played a role, as did the flutter of unwanted memories of her previous visit to Ellis Island and how close she'd come to deportation. The sun chose that moment to peer from behind a slit in the dark, grubby clouds. The lone shaft of light beamed over the Statue of Liberty, exposing her in sharp relief. A green patina had nearly overtaken the dull copper color, but did nothing to hide the sculpture's majestic beauty. When Katie had first arrived in America, that impressive robed figure had seemed the very symbol of hope. Like the lady herself, the promise of a better life was a bit tarnished now. What would Shannon think of her new country? It was a question Katie hadn't allowed herself to consider as she'd scrimped and saved for her sister's passage from Ireland. Much had changed since Katie had gone through the registration process. Much had not. She was no closer to her goal of independence. Would she ever break free of the poverty and daily struggle to survive? There were days when she wondered. A year after landing in New York, she was still scratching out a meager existence, living in a crowded tenement house on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Newly arrived immigrants staggered past her, some hopeful, others nervous, most weighted down by the weariness of their travels and bulging pieces of luggage. Children, ever resilient, darted headlong past the slower-moving adults. One of the taller boys clipped Katie's shoulder, sending her toppling into a pushcart overflowing with suitcases.
"Watch where you're going, ye bloody strumpet!"
A man with shoulders the size of a plow horse and a face to match made a shooing motion with his hands as if he were a farmer scattering chickens. "Sorry." Katie stepped out of the way just in time to avoid being run over. The smell of wet wool, cheap worn leather, and human sweat assaulted her senses. Ellis Island smelled no better now than it had a year ago. She covered her nose and moved toward the one building she'd hoped never to enter again. She had little choice but to do so today. Not yet 19 years old, a full 5 years younger than Katie, Shannon was an unmarried woman traveling alone. As such, she'd been denied entry into the country and would be held indefinitely until a family member could promise she wouldn't become a public charge. A new determination reared up, and hoisting her head a fraction higher, Katie continued toward the immigration station. Her plan was simple. She would work her way backward through the registration process, starting at the infamous kissing post.